Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this, because I want you to picture a scenario that I think pretty much all of us have experienced at some point. You're standing in your perfectly air-conditioned room on a sweltering, totally unforgiving summer day, right? You look out the window and you see a construction worker out there just laboring under the blazing sun. And as you stand there feeling that crisp, cool air against your skin, you kind of can't help but ask yourself one very specific question. How do they do it? I mean, we look at folks with fewer resources, people in much harsher conditions, and we ask ourselves these questions that are honestly born entirely out of our own modern privilege. We wonder, how do people survive without electricity in the dead of summer? Or how do they walk miles every single day without a car? How do they possibly find joy in lives that are entirely stripped of the modern conveniences that we literally rely on? Well, the answer to these questions isn't really about physical toughness at all. It actually lies in this profound truth that we so often overlook. The ultimate superpower of the human species is our radical, relentless capacity for adaptation. So, to really understand why we're built this way, we have to look under the hood at the mechanics of our minds. Which brings us to our first section, the Hedonic Treadmill Explained. And this brilliantly illustrates a fascinating framework psychologists use to understand this mechanism. It really explains why our happiness levels seem so incredibly stubborn, regardless of what life throws at us. If you think of this concept like a giant clock face showing the passage of time, you see different scenes of human life. People enduring harsh weather, laboring, reading by candlelight, planting crops. And you'll notice a continuous cycle here. Challenges inevitably trigger our adaptation. Over time, that adaptation builds up our resilience, and it keeps us moving forward on what psychologists actually call the hedonic treadmill. Hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill, is formally defined as the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. Just think about what this really means for a second. When our circumstances change, our expectations and desires shift right in tandem with them. What was once considered this rare, magnificent luxury, well, it quickly becomes an absolute necessity. And on the flip side, what was once an unbearable hardship eventually just becomes, well, just another Tuesday. Nature has literally wired us so that whatever environment we inhabit slowly becomes our default comfort zone. Let's move to and see how this builds into a highly predictable three-step cycle. Step 1, a major life event happens. Now, this could be winning the lottery, or it could be suffering a severe injury. Step 2, you experience a temporary spike or drop in happiness. You're either totally elated or you're absolutely devastated. But then comes step 3, the return to baseline. This is where adaptation kicks in. The euphoria fades or the grief softens, and your mind essentially recalibrates to your new reality. It's an absolutely brilliant survival mechanism, honestly, keeping us from being permanently paralyzed by either extreme joy or deep sorrow. This brings us right to our next section, the relativity of comfort. You see, this adaptation is not a one-way street at all. It's a completely relative, constantly moving target. What's comfortable for you might be agonizing for someone else, and vice versa. Just imagine a lifelong villager stepping into a massive metropolitan city. They might find the relentless roar of traffic and sirens entirely anxiety-inducing. Yet take a city dweller and drop them in a rural setting, and they might find the absolute silence of the night completely deafening and honestly unsettling. Our environment dictates our normal. Someone without a car doesn't view walking 5 miles a day as a tragedy. It's literally just their commute. Someone living off the grid isn't sitting around mourning the lack of smart appliances. Instead, they simply sync their biological clock with the rise and fall of the sun. They just adapt. And to really drive home how relative this whole thing is, let's flip our perspective for a minute. Just as we might look at those with less and wonder how they manage, people wrapped in extreme wealth might look at a standard, middle-class life and ask this exact same question. How do they survive in such cramped spaces without private chefs or personal drivers? To them, our everyday existence seems like an unimaginable hardship. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that comfort is entirely subjective. It is literally whatever you've grown used to. So the crucial point is that while this adaptability is incredibly powerful, it also has some extreme and sometimes pretty dark manifestations. Let's look at confinement and institutionalization. Free people often wonder how a prisoner can survive years or even decades behind bars. Yet criminologists and psychologists point to a process called institutionalization. Over time, prisoners become heavily adapted to the rigid routine, the complete lack of choices, and the strict boundaries of a penitentiary. They adapt so completely to this confined environment that the outside world, with all its freedom and unpredictability, actually begins to feel terrifying. This adaptation is so unbelievably thorough that when some prisoners are finally released, they genuinely struggle to function in a free society. They actually find themselves longing for the structured predictability of the prison they once absolutely hated. Their minds had recalibrated to make a cage their comfort zone. It's a really stark, sobering example of just how relentlessly the human mind works to normalize its surroundings, no matter how bleak they might be. Which leads us directly to the climax of today's explainer, nature's greatest miracle. Now, I want to be very, very clear here about what this means. Recognizing this psychological marvel is absolutely not about glorifying hardship or romanticizing poverty, illness, or captivity. Not at all. Those remain systemic and personal tragedies that humanity must always, always strive to alleviate. Rather, acknowledging this adaptation is an appreciation of the sheer, unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. We are not fragile glass ornaments easily shattered by a change in temperature. We are evolutionary masterpieces, completely designed to bend, reshape, and survive. We are built to endure, to recalibrate, and to just keep going. Which brings us to this incredibly profound thought from Socrates. The secret of happiness, you see, is not found in seeking more, but in developing the capacity to enjoy less. Ultimately, what this means is that true peace of mind doesn't actually lie in achieving the absolute perfection of our external luxuries. It's not about that perfectly air-conditioned room we talked about earlier. True peace is hidden within the quiet, miraculous machinery of the human mind, our innate ability to accept, adjust, and find a way to smile no matter where we happen to land. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about your week. What do you think of this psychological angle on human survival and happiness? When thinking about the hedonic treadmill and our relentless adaptability, would you want to expand more on the evolutionary biology side of why we adapted this way? Or do you think it's more valuable to focus on the philosophy of how we find contentment? It's a massive question about who we are and how we are built to navigate reality. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to think on that.